Michael Boyle's StrengthCoach.com presents the Strength Coach Podcast, brought to you by Perform Better, the experts in functional training and rehabilitation. PerformBetter.com.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 169 of the Strength Coach Podcast, the official podcast of Michael Boyle, StrengthCoach.com, the world's best source for strength conditioning information. You can try StrengthCoach.com out for 3 days for just $1, and if you have a staff of 2 or more, you want to sign up as a group, you have a special membership offer for you up to 50% off, depending on how many people you got. Check it out at StrengthCoach.com. I'm your host, Anthony Renna, and the show notes are located at StrengthCoachPodcast.com. Want to get in touch with me, shoot me an email to StrengthCoachPodcast@gmail.com. All right, on the Coach's Corner, I spoke to Coach Boyle about a few topics that came up from a forum thread called 3 Knee Dominant Exercises. Lots of little offshoot topics came from that, and got Coach Boyle on to talk all about that. That and much more coming up on the Coach's Corner in a little while. Chris Parr from Perform Better joins us to talk about the huge summer sale. For the Results Fitness University Business of Fitness segment, Rachel Cosgrove is on to talk about building your team. Last week she had on hiring your first employee, so she's building on that. For the Hit the Gym with the Strength Coach segment, I have Schexnayder, founder of Schexnayder Athletic Consulting and former member of the Louisiana State University track staff. Saw him in Providence. He is awesome, and I wanted to get him on to talk about his lecture, Organizing a Plyometric Program. Lots of stuff coming up from Coach Schexnayder in a little while. For the Art of Coaching with Exos, Danielle Lofato continues her 3-part series on nutritional programming as it relates to the national soccer team. Part 2 is on putting together the menus for a traveling team. And for the Functional Movement System segment, Brett Jones finishes his 2-part series on breathing. Lots of things to get to, so let's get on the phone with Coach Boyle. All right, now it's time for the Coach's Corner with Coach Boyle. Coach, how you doing?
I am doing great, Anthony. How are you?
All right. Hanging in there. Want to go over, at least start the conversation. We'll probably talk a lot just about this, is this knee dominant exercise post. Because there was some kind of good other discussions that came out of it, like always. Let me read the post. Would like to know from Mike and others how you would categorize the 3 main knee dominant exercise for athletes who do a 3-day-a-week full body workout. So he said this athlete can goblet squat 100 pounds, so squat is no more option, I guess, since Mike does not like front squats anymore. Which I thought was kind of a funny statement, like just because Mike doesn't like him, if you're a goblet squatting him, I don't know why you just keep going, whatever. But day 1, elevated split squat. Day 2, single leg squat. What would be the options for day 3? So let's start there. You have your elevated split squat on day 1, your single leg squat on day 2. And what would your option be for day 3?
It was a really interesting post. I thought it actually promoted. It's really interesting because it took a kind of a funny turn at the end. I'll get to that. You'll get to that eventually. But, one, obviously, when you say, Mike doesn't like front squats, I think that's a great reason for everyone not to do front squats, of course. But but I think it's very interesting looking at this stuff like, people haven't looked at the current programs. They're still using like 04 programs from Functional Training for Sports, and also looking at stuff and realizing, wow, people didn't read that CNS intensive article, or if they did, they forgot about it. And then sort of going through all of that stuff and seeing, wow, as much as you think you're constantly kind of banging the same drum all the time, and you worry about, wow, people are getting sick of hearing me say this, you realize that people still don't really have a great grasp of what we're talking about. So it's just one of those things that I look at and I say, wow. And that's why I started writing the article, and then I realized that I had actually done a previous blog post on why we don't squat. And then I kind of went, okay, I'm going to try to go back. And that's why I didn't finish it, because I was like, all right, I've got to sort of edit it so it's not the same post I already wrote. Then I need to link it to the old post, because, we're talking about there's a really broad range of reasons why we do what we do. But one of the big reasons that maybe I don't hit on enough is that you can't simply pick different stuff for different people in an environment like a college program or a business like mine and say, well, this person's going to back squat and this person's going to front squat and this person's going to do rear elevated split squat, because you have a big, and this is what I talked about in the post that I haven't published yet, a big kind of monkey see, monkey do problem in terms of whenever somebody sees somebody doing something, particularly if it involves more weight than what they use, and this is, I guess, in our male-dominated strength and conditioning world, they automatically want to do that. So if someone sees someone back squatting with 315, why can't I do that? He's got 3 plates on there. That's what they're thinking in their mind. That looks really cool. He looks much stronger than me, even though maybe front squatting 225 might be better for your back and not as stressful. And even though split squatting like 240 for split squats would be better also. But yeah, I think you have to decide what you're going to do and what your programming is going to be, and then you've got to be that. You can't be bobbing around back and forth because of this sort of groupthink or monkey see, monkey do kind of effect. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, again, your environment is that's your environment, but I understand where you're going with that. I just wonder, you're getting, they're talking about goblet squatting here, up to 100 pounds. Is that the magic number? You can't do any more bilateral after 100 pounds? I would say.
And that's for us, yeah. I mean, that is the magic number is actually 120, and then it's really 140, and it depends on how many weight vests you want to put on. And there's a lot of stuff you can kind of factor into that. 120 is our biggest dumbbell. And then if you think, okay, any more than one weight vest isn't uncomfortable, so you could go to 120. And then we've talked about sort of the elevated, the kettlebell sumo deadlift or the dumbbell sumo deadlift. And I think you can get into that argument. But I do think at some point you hit that point where you say, okay, I need to be primarily unilateral, unless you want to go to the regular old front squat, back squat kind of stuff.
Yeah, have you tried any of the double kettlebell front squats? I mean, it does throw in a whole new element now you have to teach people to basically clean the 24Ks because it's hard to cheat those up into the rack position. But have you tried any of that? Because it's 24K.
We have tried that with some of our better athletes. The problem with that is now you've got a holding problem in terms of wrists and really being able to get that proper kettlebell rack position, which presents another set of issues. But so, we've played around with that, but I think as far as kind of looking at, okay, this is what the whole group is going to do. And I just think you get to a certain point where unilateral makes more sense. And then I'll flip-flop again because I think we've gotten a little bit sloppy with our unilateral. Sometimes I look at our really heavy split squats and think, I don't know if I like those anymore because it's so, it's getting heavy split squats are getting ugly in much the same way that heavy back squats or heavy front squats got ugly, in terms of you're looking at people are a little twisted and they're using their back foot a lot. So one of the things that I think I may have mentioned before with our Olympic girls, I think next time we test, we're going to do a real pure one-leg squat test. I got to play, actually, I haven't sent you the video yet, but Devin McConnell sent me a video of a guy, one of his guys, I think doing 190 for 3 in a real one-leg squat. So I think he's got actually racked kettlebells and vests. And so I think as with everything that we're doing, there's going to be continued evolution, which is really cool. But I also think, and this is kind of the flip side of that, is that you look and see, wow, some people still are 2 steps behind us and don't really understand where we got to. So I think that's stuff that we have to balance out as we go, because you realize the people that are asking the questions are people that I would consider to be reasonably well-versed in our programming, yet they still kind of hit the same stumbling blocks sometimes. So to me, that means I'm lacking clarity. I haven't, even as clear as I think I've made this and as much as I think I've spent a huge amount of time talking about this, I really haven't.
What about, you were talking a while back, and I haven't even mentioned it in a while, remember you were talking about when you were trying to teach guys to clean and they started to get some heavy cleans, they were having a problem. So you were kind of going back to, not a crazy heavy front squat, but you were trying to get them to front squat to have them be able to handle that load. Have you stepped away from the front squats entirely again?
We have a little bit, yeah. Maybe because we've done a better job teaching clean. I think you watch all the staff meetings. I would probably venture to say that teaching the hang clean is 3 staff meetings a year, where we almost go over the same thing that we've gone over already again with people. And I do think now I think our staff I think it solidifies and then it kind of becomes more malleable and it sort of goes up and down a little bit sometimes. So if you think there was a time, with like Jonas and Kyle and Nicole and people like that, we had a really strong, solid staff. And then a bunch of those guys went on and got new jobs. And then we brought in newer people. So I think sometimes as we ride those waves of staff change, we need to keep remembering to go back to some of the basic stuff, like, the basic Olympic lifting stuff. But we haven't felt the need for that, front squat or, we were doing like clean front squat combos. We are doing that a little bit this summer. But like last summer, we put a lot of emphasis on a day 4 complex, hoping that kids would use that complex for in-season work. And I guess, and this is why I always say the same things. This is what's cool about what we're doing and about our industry is that we really don't have the answers. But I think as a group, we're really actively searching for them in terms of, okay, what's going to be in that? What kind of leads into the end of that post where the guy was talking about only doing 2 exercises? I don't think you can do 2 exercises because there's so much that you need to do if you start looking at, knee dominant single leg, hip dominant single leg, horizontal push, horizontal pull, vertical push. And, any of your core stuff, you just can't, like, how do you get a workout to be that brief when a lot of times we're still trying to figure out, okay, how do we get all of the hip, like I can't even get all the hip dominant patterns in that I want all the time in terms of sort of getting, because we still do bilateral. So, getting a bilateral hip dominant and then a unilateral hip dominant and then something in that kind of bridge leg curl category that we would, I guess, had labeled then bent leg hip extension stuff. So if you look at just that, there's 3, to me, very distinct exercise variables that need to be in there. Then you start getting into, this knee dominant idea, and that goes back to the post. To me, I want a 1-leg squat one day, and I want a rear foot elevated split squat the other day. And then we go to okay, what do you do on day 3? And obviously we threw stuff out there in terms of there are those other patterns, lunging, reverse lunging, slide board lunging, lateral squatting, lateral lunging. And I think that stuff falls in a little bit more of the extra stuff to do category. Not, I guess that would, if I think of what are my need to do's and what are my nice to do's, all that day 3 stuff falls in the nice to do's category, but doesn't really get into my need to do category. So, I thought it was a really good post. I love these ones that kind of take on a life of their own and start out kind of simple. Okay, this is what we do. And then if you think about that, it's led into, the CNS intensive idea. It's led into talking about movement work versus strength work and how much time for each one. And I just think there's a lot of cool stuff going on.
Yeah. No, that's why I said
post.
I know. That's why I said I think we're going to end up spending most of the time on this because I feel like, my thought is on that 3rd day or that 3rd movement pattern is it doesn't sound like to me you're giving enough emphasis to the lateral lunge or the lateral split squat. And I'm wondering why, since, we don't want everything to be in the sagittal plane there.
Right.
I'm not saying we need to go crazy and go, and I know you do the lunge matrix more as a warm up, but like, I feel like, and you've shown BU posts, like I know your hockey guys were doing, it seemed like it was more important when it was just hockey, when you were having your guys do some, kind of weighted lateral lunges. Do you not put the emphasis there because you do work slide board, or what would be the reason why you're not trying to get kind of that different pattern? Because it does seem you have two, or mostly we're in this sagittal plane. Why wouldn't you spend more time on that to make it more important to have a lateral lunge?
One of the reasons is I think it's hard to load. I've tried to do it. I tried to do it last year with our baseball guys because I really felt like, well, baseball has this huge frontal plane component between hitting and pitching. You know what I mean? Hitting is all frontal plane. Pitching is all frontal plane. I think the struggle as we went along was trying to load that lateral squat, lateral lunge. I think you get to a certain point, like in the 50, 60 pound range, and then it becomes really difficult to kind of continue to look good. It's kind of the same way I felt about slide board lunge. One year at BU, I felt like, man, slide board lunge is going to be that's going to be our main. Before we went to split squat, we tried that as our main lower body exercise, thinking we're just going to load up slide board lunge. And all of a sudden we get the slide board lunge at around 135. We were actually back squatting it, back squat position. And it didn't look good anymore. I was like, well, I can't see somebody. And that's what I think is cool. I got to forward you this video from Devin, because I think sometimes there's things that are in your head that say you can't do this, and then you see somebody else do it, and you think, oh, maybe we can do this. And that's how I feel like they did. I mean, this kid won it's crazy. He said he had somebody do 230. But the video he sent me was this quick clip of a kid doing a 190 triple in the one-leg squat. And I've seen our guys have done 100 per 10, but it's the same way. We haven't really loaded that like we should. And I think we haven't loaded the frontal plane like we should. And part of it is that, we're really sagittal plane dominant, sagittal plane educated thinkers, and you think you've been through the Todd Wright stuff and the Gary Gray stuff, and you always come back man, we got to hit that frontal plane harder. And then I think you do it for a little bit, and then you kind of drift away from it again. And you do it for a little bit, and you drift away from it. And even for me, as we're having this conversation, I'm thinking, damn, we really need to make that exercise more of a priority. But as again, we talked about, when you're looking at 2 to 3 lower body exercises per workout and only 2 or 3, only 2 lower body days in the summer, suddenly that becomes a little extraneous. But maybe it shouldn't be. So I guess there's a lot to think about there.
Yeah, and you're right, 100%. Obviously, the load does become, especially with my people. A little bit older, it's a tough move to get into. I just want to make sure I'm doing it once a week, especially with the golfers and the weight shift, et cetera. And, being older, I want them to be strong in a bunch of different positions. And like I said, I'm not loading the rotational lunge. That's just in the warm-up, via the split stance the lunge matrix. But I also feel like between some slide board that I do and plyometric, I do, my guys are here 2 to 3 days a week. They probably do, some kind of skater plyos every session. And, we're not doing a lot of foot contacts, but I just want to keep getting it in. I want to kind of keep developing that speed as well. I feel like that's the important part. Just keep that fast twitch muscle fiber going.
And we definitely do that. But I think that, the nice thing about these conversations is they make me think, and I have to remember that really in phase 3 for us, lateral lunge should start to become part of the strength program, because we'll do lateral squat in the warm-up in phase 1. We'll do lateral lunge in the warm-up in phase 2. But then in phase 3, we should start loading lateral lunge, and we don't. But that's why I said sometimes these conversations are really good reminders, and I'll go back and write stuff. But I've got notes. I probably have that note written 5 times in 5 different old notebooks, and then I kind of lose it. And like everything, I think it's really hard to keep everything. There's just so much stuff to keep track of. I guess that's the way I feel. Sometimes I'm like, oh my God. There's all, you're trying to keep it simple, but you're trying to make it progressive. You're trying to, you're always, it's like playing ping pong or tennis by yourself.
Well, you're right though, because I feel like, and I think I get it with a lot of if I come back from Perform Better, even for some things that I might not have done in a while, same idea, I'm not doing enough of that. or just kind of which pieces. I guess there's that old kind of first heard it from Gray, like sometimes it's better to take away than to add, right? Addition by subtraction. And I think sometimes I'm trying not to add too much, but at the same time, one, you put something in that you feel like is important, and then something else kind of gets sacrificed. Because again, we only have a certain amount of time.
I really struggle with sort of the battle between, as you said, being more minimalist, using minimum effective dose. You know what I mean? Like maximum benefit, minimum load, and then trying to figure out, okay, am I doing enough? Am I doing too much? It's not an easy thing to do. And I'm constantly kind of looking at notes, even as a here with you going over, we're doing this sort of, trying to have an adult programming, and we're trying to think about our programming basically having 3 phases or 4 phases and how all that stuff is going to work. It's not easy. That's why I think it's funny sometimes. And I think the guy's name is Casey Sullivan, and I can see by his picture, like he's a young guy, and it's like, well, what if you get guys that move really well and you just want to know, you want to really work on movement? And I'm kind of like, and I wrote at the end of that thread, and try it. But I don't believe it'll work. But I think, young people can be optimistic and idealistic, and maybe some of us that are older can be almost the opposite in terms of sometimes they say, talk about the frontal plane stuff, I'm so stuck in what we've always done that sometimes I just default back to that without ever thinking about it. And you've heard me say in staff meetings, sometimes I'll disagree with something based on my opinion as a collegiate strength coach that may not really be valid anymore. Do you know what I mean? About something, and think, I did that because that's the way we always did in college. But in reality, I don't know if that really matters right now, but I'm so ingrained to think that way that it's really hard for me not to. So I think that's one of the reasons I like the forum, and I like reading and interacting, because even if people don't make you change, they make you think.
Absolutely. And Casey did bring up, he did a good job. It was very thoughtful in what he was saying. I think he had some good points about maybe just kind of talking about maybe law of diminishing returns on some of the strength. But like you said, I felt like almost where he was going was, they're strong now, but you're almost going to make them weak. So be careful with that, So definitely a great discussion. This is like just this one forum topic, 3 main knee dominant exercises, basically where a lot of things came up from. So good stuff, Coach. Glad we can always make you think. So thanks for coming on, and we'll talk to you next time.
All right, thanks, Ant. I'll see you.
All right, now it's time for the Ask the Equipment Experts with Perform Better. I'm here with Chris Parr. Chris, thanks for coming on.
Anthony, it's always a pleasure to be on. Thanks for having me.
All right, good times at the Providence Summit. I haven't spoken to you since, but as always, you guys put on such a great show. And one thing that you were saying to me a while back when you first announced the schedule was about Rob Gilbert. The special presentation, the keynote speaker on Friday night, and certainly didn't disappoint. Made you think. A lot of fun. Good job getting him in there.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, it's always a long shot when you go by some recommendations, and I followed him on YouTube and his own website, and I got some really good recommendations from him, and some heard some positive feedback. But you never know how the group is going to accept him. Because it is our first sports psychologist that we've had that was a little bit different than anything that we've ever done. So, yeah, I was extremely happy. My fingers were crossed when we were out in Chicago at the first one, but I knew he was going to be a huge hit when we got to Providence, because he was really, he was a big talk of the town out in Chicago with what he had in the whole idea of getting everyone all in.
Absolutely. I think. It's funny, sports psychology, we've heard it with some of the more high-energy coaches like maybe a Martin Rooney or Todd Durkin. We've heard it with Thomas Plummer and Rick Mayo, the business guys, Alan Cosgrove, just to make, that session, a lot of times you want people leaving with more energy than they came in. And I think it was a good lesson from someone who also gave you strategies instead of just being like, it wasn't just about being in a good mood. It was actually picking some strategies to help you make people laugh and get them going.
Exactly. And I'm getting excited because next week we're back out in Long Beach for our last of the 3 summits for this year, and I'm looking forward to Rob, and I know he's going to be well received out there.
Absolutely. Last summit coming up. What's the date on that, Chris?
That is, it's next Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, which is August 6th through the 9th. Good
stuff. And just give me a rundown of some of the different presenters that'll be there. We know the Mike Boyles and the Great Cooks, but some of the different guys like a Donnie Saladino was in Providence. Who else is going to be in?
We have quite a few actually that was not at any of the other summits this year, which is still great. We have Rachel Cosgrove, Michelle Dalcourt, Robert Dos Remedio, Sue Falsone will be out there. We have Brian Grasso is back with us this year. We got Scott Livingston, coming down from Canada. Who else do we have out there that I can think of? Lenny Parasino has always been really good. He spoke for us the last 3 years out in Long Beach, and he's always well received out there. And I'm trying to think if that was... Oh, and Robert Yang. How could I forget Robert? Robert's doing another nutritional talk on coffee, friend to foe, which I think will be pretty good. I'm looking forward to it myself.
As everybody walks in there with like 20-ounce coffees.
The big venti Starbucks, of course.
It's an important thing. Trainers, drink a lot of coffee, so it's going to be a good one. And Robert's awesome, so love him. Chris, let's talk about the summer sale. It's the end of the summer sale, which you actually seem to get start. You should be calling that pretty soon the start of the summer sale because it's becoming earlier and earlier.
We've started it. It's always when do you start it? So it is an August September sale, but we always started it like the last week of July. And even we launched it even going into the last week. Last week we launched it last Thursday on the internet. But this year we pushed the envelope. We really went after our manufacturers and we tried to. We've been working with them over the last 4 or 5 months, trying to get them to where we could get our prices down, lowered by volume buying. So basically what we did was it allowed us to do that. So we were able to really have some really good deals this year. And we also threw in, free freight on a lot of the items, which is on shipping on any items over $50. But there's about 75% of the items that are on the summer sale have free freight on them. So we did push the envelope. We got some really good discounts. We have obviously back again, some of our most popular items, from med balls, ropes, sandbags, kettlebells, bands, a lot of the items that we are our most popular where it's a nice thing where it allows us to, at that special time of year, to put them down low and give anywhere from 20 to 40% off of them.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I always say with Aaron, every time this comes around, this is always like a good time to be opening a gym just because, again, you guys really, it's a good variety. I mean, right down from assessments to like FMS and Y balance kits to timers to sleds, assault air bikes. And like you said, between the kettlebells, the med balls, all of the bands, all the different bands and the foam roll products, you guys have really run the gamut on a good variety of products here. So, and that ends how long does that go till, Chris?
That's going to go through September 30th. So it's funny how we started it years ago. I think we're in like our 12th or 13th year of the summer sale, and we started it out as August and September used to be our 2 slowest months. So they were our 2 slowest months, which, August is always a good travel month, kids going back to school, facilities aren't really getting, looking to get things in, to buy extra stuff. It's not really the buying time of year. So when we implemented it about 13 years ago, it picked up. It did pick up August and September, and made it actually two of our best months that we had. So it went from two of our slowest months to two of our busiest months.
Awesome. Very cool. I'll remind everybody, if you haven't gotten a catalog, if you're not on the email list, it is a great thing to be on for other deals throughout the year. But you can go to performbetter.com to check out the end of the summer sale. So, Chris, have a great trip to Long Beach. I know it's going to be a great weekend. So thanks for coming on today.
Anthony, thanks. And it's always a pleasure to be on. Thank you again for having me.
All right, now it's time for the Hit the Gym with the Train Coach, and today I have Coach Boo Schexnayder on. Coach, thanks for coming on today.
I'm very happy to be here. Thank you, Anthony.
All right, well, I saw you in Providence. I saw your practical and your lecture. It wasn't the first time I had seen you at the BSMPG a couple years back. But this I thought was really interesting because, your lecture was Organization and Applications of Plyometric Training. So I really wanted to see it because I think, even for, I don't care who it is, because, for example, in your practical, I mean, we had some, what people might think, it's to all trainers, probably some former athletes and some people that look like they were doing it right, but it was, you brought them out there and kind of corrected them. I thought it was interesting because I think with this system, it wasn't just for beginners, it's for everybody. And so I thought it was really interesting, and we're going to talk about classifying the different multi-jumps. But let's start out with, because we have heard before this whole idea of maybe some prerequisites, and I think for everybody, it's kind of like, wow, prerequisites. That seems a little crazy because kids are always playing in the playground. Why should we have to have any prerequisites for something that we feel like people should be able to do? So is there anything for you that you're going to look at from a prerequisite perspective that you'd want people to have a basic understanding or knowledge of?
Philosophically, yes. You make a good point. Kids play jumping games like hopscotch and jump rope and stuff like that all the time. So your milder plyometric stuff, I don't really consider any prerequisites per se. And typically I take low-level athletes and are willing to do simple, mild types of plyometric stuff like that with them immediately. But before I progress to anything more advanced and more intense, I think there are some prerequisites. First of all, I look for basic levels of strength. You have to be able to hold up under impact, so basic strength levels are important. I don't have any hard, fast rules, but I kind of trust my eye and kind of have a few guidelines I use as far as what I'm looking for there. Basically, to explain, I kind of use posture as a guide to dictate volumes and intensity. And when I'm watching these athletes execute these skills, I look for postural deviations, and postural deviations are my signal to either alter the workout or stop the workout or move down to a simpler exercise or something like that. So you have to be strong enough to maintain postural alignment under the forces of impact. And the other thing is postural correctness. Postural correctness and postural strength are actually two different things. You can be strong but still not understand how to get the body into the correct physical positions in order to accept and receive impact correctly. And that would be a dangerous situation as well. So in short, certain strength levels and then, again, postural strength and postural correctness are the three basic things that I look for as not only a prerequisite for plyometric activity, but also as a guide as to whether I'm doing things that are actually appropriate for every individual athlete.
Can you give us an example of maybe a postural deviation that you might see, maybe one or two of them that you might see that would signal to you, okay, we need to, regress?
Well, the single biggest and most common example is the inability to keep the pelvis in a neutral position. For example, if we have an athlete who's doing like a single leg hopping type of skill or something like that, the pelvis has to remain neutral in line with the spine in order to keep that exercise safe. And if you see the pelvis slip into a position of anterior tilt, lordotic types of postures, but immediately that's a tremendous trouble sign and a red flag to rethink things and go back to the drawing board.
And so when you say go back to the drawing board, would you basically think of maybe some correctives for that pelvis within that movement, or would you kind of like, for example, put them on the floor, work on some different core exercises, et cetera, or would you do it within the context of that the plyometric exercise that you were doing?
Well, I like to do it within the context of the plyometric exercise. I mean, the reason I'm doing the plyometrics in the first place is because I need to develop elastic strength, and I need to develop it in a way that's at an appropriate level for this particular athlete. So that would be a signal not to immediately stop and go to some other type of activity. That would happen on another day at another time in a different universe, but is appropriate. But it would be a signal for me to drop down in my plyometric classification scheme to something that is of a lower impact and less demanding, that they can handle and can show proper posture while they're executing it.
Interesting. Let's talk about the first thing you did in your practical was you had everybody starting out skipping, which I thought was pretty interesting. Can you go over why you do that?
Sure. Skipping is just a good activity. It presents a lot of teaching opportunities. An underlying premise in my whole plyometric organizational schemes is that you're not just teaching strength or power or elastic strength, you're actually developing movement quality. And that's part of the root reason why I feel strongly in beginning this way. So it presents a lot of teaching opportunities. I have the athletes skip for height and skip for distance as a real early step in my teaching progressions. A fundamental feature of plyometrics is that you want full-footed contacts in most of your exercises. What you're trying to do is use as much of the foot as possible to dissipate, as much of the area of the foot as possible to dissipate those impact forces. So you're looking for full-footed contacts, particularly heel-to-toe rolling type of contacts in your horizontal plyometric work. Well, skipping is almost a foolproof teaching environment for that. The body kind of defaults inherently to these types of foot contacts when you're skipping, so you can get lots of repetitions there, and it's a good opportunity to establish that terminology and that movement pattern. Plus, skipping is also a good time to teach pelvic alignment and the swinging movements, and it's a basic motor pattern that some people can't do, so you're looking at the roots of movement quality as well.
And now you have them starting out, is it skipping for height first?
It doesn't necessarily matter. Anytime that you go more vertical than horizontal, you increase the stability component, meaning that during flight your athletes are more stable when they're jumping up as opposed to out. So the vertical version is a little simpler and a little easier for athletes to do. But as far as teaching progressions are concerned, I tend to introduce them both almost simultaneously, with the understanding that the horizontal version is going to be more challenging to those athletes. You know, a big part of understanding plyometric teaching is understanding the whole role of dynamic stability in locomotion. You know, when you get overly rotated or forward, the body tends to break down as far as technical execution is concerned. You know, the body seeks to ground itself or stiffen or do something to deal with inherent instability. Horizontal components are always going to involve more instability than vertical components. And that's why, as a general rule, when I'm putting together plyometric teaching schemes, I tend to overemphasize vertical in the early stages of learning. But I will introduce horizontal immediately, but in a more remedial form.
And I remember when you did introduce the kind of the skipping for length, one of those kind of red flags that you were seeing was when people skip for that length and they would lose balance. Talk to us about when you see that, what you're going to go back to.
As soon as I see instability in any type of horizontal plyometric activity, I start to move back to a more vertical environment. I start to cue more vertical takeoffs, teach them to push up rather than out more, because that basically restores or reestablishes the whole stability issue. So again, it's basically anytime that you're working in more remedial formats, you always have to overemphasize the vertical component. So anytime I struggle, I see an athlete who's struggling with that type of stuff, I always overemphasize the vertical component. That just seems to be a natural anatomical product as far as human performance is concerned. We just seem to be a little bit more horizontal natured, and I always find that with any athlete in almost any sport or event that you typically have to overemphasize the vertical qualities to the horizontal qualities at a ratio of about 2 to 1 in order to get the movement quality that you want that's going to transfer into sport.
Yeah, interesting. So another thing that you were talking about in that in the practical that I saw, and I thought people were really struggling with this because I think a common cue for trainers is often high knees, and whether it's running or skipping or jumping, for a lot of times I hear that. I see coaches instructing that. But you were talking about keeping the knee below the hip. Again, I felt like people were struggling with that. Can you talk about why you're instructing keeping the knee below the hip?
Well, high knees has been part of coaching culture forever. And it's something that's easy to say, and it's something that's easy to see, and I think that's why it might be so prevalent. And don't get me wrong, when you're running or when you're executing plyometrics, the swinging movements are important. So I prefer to say that I'm trying to teach the swinging movements at appropriate levels. So I don't want you to think that I'm never trying to get anybody to lift their knees or anything. But I think that is in many plyometric schemes highly, highly overemphasized and overcoached to the point where it produces some bad habits. And basically there's about 4 reasons why I teach it that way. The first one is just to battle the basic misconception. You know, many young athletes, when you bring them out there and you tell them, get up, the first thing they do is raise their knees. Well, raising the knees doesn't project you into the air. It doesn't project your body into flight. Projecting your hips up, where your center of mass is located, actually projects you into flight. So that's a common misconception, that getting the knees up gets you up, and that isn't necessarily the case at all. So I'm always thinking of plyometrics in terms of elevating the hips or displacing the center of mass, as opposed to looking at peripheral movements of the body. You know, driving the knee doesn't make you get any higher any more than swinging the arms harder gets you higher. I know it's a part of the takeoff of each plyometric repetition, but at the same time, it is only valid within the context of how the entire body operates regarding force application to the ground. So that's a misconception that I try to battle. Another reason, the second reason, is that the body seems to possess a bit of a flexion reflex. When one joint flexes, you know, we have a net of fascia throughout our body, and it communicates. So joints are communicating with each other at all times through this electrical phenomena that we see as far as fascial communication. So when you really overcue or really emphasize knee drive, the knee obviously is going to flex earlier and quicker and more abruptly. When the knee flexes quickly and abruptly, the hip tends to flex as well. And as a result of the knee flexing and producing additional flexion in the hips, now we've lost that neutral pelvis, which is so important when we're doing single leg hopping and skipping types of routines. So overdriving the knee tends to produce anterior pelvic tilt if you're not careful. And that's one of the reasons why I tend to de-emphasize the knee lift just a little bit. Another reason is the way the human body works. When you basically have simultaneous processes going on, you know, kinetic chains are working simultaneously, those processes are going to happen together and at the same rates. And typically when one stops, the other starts. Well, if you look at any plyometric activity, you're doing 2 things. You're swinging that free leg, but you're also pushing against the ground with the other leg. And by overcuing the knee drive, often what we see resulting is the knee reaches its final position earlier. And as a result of that, we actually compromise and stop the push off of the ground earlier before it's actually complete. So by blocking the knee just a little bit lower and de-emphasizing the knee lift a little bit more, you actually accentuate the push off of the ground, and your athletes are actually able to jump a little further and a little bit higher as a result of that. And then the fourth reason is probably the most important of all. You know, the quadricep, if you keep the knee a little bit lower, the quadricep is always in position where it can turn on in a timely manner in order to protect the knee joint. So by keeping the knees just a little bit lower during plyometric exercises, keeping the feet a little bit closer to the ground, the quad is always there and ready as an injury prevention mechanism. So almost all of your problems, short-term problems with patellar tendonitis and such, or capsular issues, or long-term problems like arthritis and things like that, you just basically almost eliminate completely all of those risks by doing it that way.
Coach, can you talk to us about landing? Because I've heard some different things with landing where, for example, don't land lower than what you started at. Or maybe speaking or listening to Bill Knowles speak, he was talking about a more stiffer landing because that's really what ends up happening in sport. And if we don't get the athlete to, into that stiffer landing and not cushioning it as much, we're not preparing them for sport. Can you just kind of go over maybe your concepts or philosophies with this idea of teaching landing?
Yes. The whole idea of stiffness is incredibly important and valid. When I'm teaching plyometrics, I think probably the most important thing that I do is teach what I call pre-recruitment, basically meaning that the quality of the landing and the conversion to vertical, of course, is dictated primarily by the quality of preparation of the muscles and joints prior to impact. If you fall off of a box and hit the ground and bounce onto another box, when you're falling off of that first box and the time that you're spending in the air prior to impact, that's not wasted time. That's not busy time. That's time where the quadricep muscles and the ankle, the muscles around the ankle and so forth, are stiffened in anticipation of impact. So this pre-recruitment is a very important idea, and it relates exactly to what we should see as far as stiffness is concerned. Now, that being said, there's a lot of stuff out there in the literature regarding stiffness, and I agree with it entirely. But I do want to say that the reason why you see so much stuff in the literature about stiffness is because the typical problem that most athletes experience is upon impacts, there's a bit of a collapse there. So we teach stiffness and pre-recruitment in order to fix that particular problem. And the other part of that, of course, is to choose the appropriate plyometric activity. But at the same time, there is another side. For every 10 athletes I work with, 9 of those athletes are not going to be stiff enough at impact, and they're a little bit flaccid when they make impact, and I have to teach them to be stiffer and to pre-recruit better so that we get a better down-to-up conversion. On the other hand, one of the 10 is typically going to be too stiff and doesn't involve enough elastic energy production, doesn't involve enough of a stretch reflex or an elastic response in the tissue. So it is a double-edged sword. So I'm not at all combating any philosophies of stiffness. I teach that every day. But I do want to make people understand that there is another side of the sword. You can actually pre-recruit too much, possibly be too stiff, and as a result of that, you don't really cash in on the elastic benefits from the plyometric exercise.
Okay, great. Let's talk about, in your lecture, you started out, categorizing the multi-jumps. And so you classified 4 multi-jumps: in-place jumps, short bounds, extended bounds, and depth jumps. Can you talk about each one? Like, start out with the in-place jumps, what you mean by that, and what's really what your goals are within that category.
Well, yeah, I'm a real proponent of what I call purposeful training. I just think that you match the plyometric exercise to the purpose. What are you trying to accomplish? And I'm really not a fan of mindless plyometric execution, meaning we do our plyos Tuesday and Thursday, period, end of story. Well, what precisely are you trying to accomplish? And I think that each of these categories, and the reason why I classify them this way is because they're effectively divided by purpose. And you mentioned the in-place jumps. Well, the in-place jumps, basically, I do easy ones or hard ones. The purpose of the easier ones are typically for lower leg conditioning, just to condition the lower leg from the knee down against the typical maladies that jump athletes encounter, shin splints and so forth. But the more advanced, the slightly harder in-place jumps, these are the best way to establish your initial plyometric volumes. You know, if you're going to have an athlete who's going to do high volumes of plyometric training at some point, or whether they're going to do intense plyometrics, you know, the idea of a base here is important. So what we're trying to do is establish some type of volume of jump work. And in-place jumps are the best way to do this. You can do it with anything, but in-place jumps are by far the best way, because with in-place jumps, there are so many different exercises and so many different forms of movement that you can use. The diversity makes it practically impossible to develop any type of repetitive movement syndromes. So the diversity of the in-place jumps is extremely valuable and makes them the best tool to establish volume. So that's what I'm looking for with in-place jumps. I use it to establish my initial volumes of jump or plyometric types of work in a diverse environment, with the diversity being the injury prevention mechanism, the injury prevention guardian. The short bounds are about technical demand. I subcategorize those into horizontal and vertical work, but the short bounds I typically limit to about 5 contacts. And again, it's all about technical demand, meaning the way we apply forces to the ground during those exercises is very similar to the way we apply forces to the ground during gait, during sprinting, during sports skills. So I think that the short bounds have tremendous carryover and tremendous transfer into sports skill and movement quality. And that's why I kind of have some things that I do and rules that I follow in my own personal training as far as mixing and matching horizontal and vertical work, because horizontal plyometrics will enhance certain types of movements, whereas vertical plyometrics tend to enhance other types of movements. Extended bounds to me are about sustaining force production. You know, the exercises there are pretty much the same as the short bound exercises, but they're done over much greater distances, 20, 30, 40 meters or so. I think these are highly misunderstood. They're often used as a way to develop volumes, and I think that this is a really bad idea because they're so repetitious. The movement pattern is repetitive. They're cyclic in nature. The foot contacts are identical from rep to rep to rep. So the repetitious nature doesn't make them a great way to develop initial volumes. That's why I prefer in-place jumps. But if you're looking at sustaining force production in your sports that have kind of a power theme but also have somewhat of an endurance theme, that's when these types of exercises really start to show their value, and that's when I find that they're most useful in my training. And then finally, the depth jumps you mentioned, I kind of break these up into single or double leg schemes, but these are for high-end elastic strength development. Once I've taken a person through the gears and through the phases, and I'm looking for a crowning gem to try to bring the elastic strength, reactive strength levels to even higher, that's when I go to the depth jumps. So obviously they're going to require quite a bit of preparation before I move into that particular plyometric scheme.
So yeah, you use the planets as a kind of a classification system too. Like for example, you were saying, we have to be on Mercury first and then go, to Venus and then Mars, etc. Is that how you work or kind of schedule your, not only periodize it, but also within a session? Are you going to make sure you're doing, like, let's say you do have somebody who is at a high level and they're starting, you're introducing the depth jumps. Will you kind of work their way up, like, so some in-place jumps into the next, like the short bounds into extended bounds into depth jumps, or will they have to do that within, is that okay to kind of just start to jump in, maybe, some of the short bounds and extended bounds within that particular session? You
the rationale you just gave of moving from one form to another in terms of intensity is perfectly valid, but I look at that more of a long-term type of procedure as opposed to something you do within the context of a workout. I tend to compartmentalize things a little more and keep them in structured and the exercise choices in a way that are valid to a particular point in the year and are appropriate to a particular point in the year. So the schemes that you said of moving through the different things, yeah, I do that, but that's really a more of a long-term type of thing. Typically, when I bring athletes to the track for a plyometric session, I have a particular category in mind, and I have a certain intensity level in mind, and then I just watch it closely to make sure that I'm getting the power outputs that I want.
Can you talk about, you mentioned a little bit in your lecture as well, is some periodization with the plyometrics. Can you kind of go over your philosophy on that?
Wow, that could be a long time, but I'll give you some highlights, okay? First of all, obviously, I progress in intensities, so I typically use the short bounds to begin the training year, to start to teach technical demand and force application, and I use the in-place jumps at the same time on different days in order to establish volumes. Then I progress over the course of time to extended bounds if they're appropriate, and depth jumps to produce to give me a training environment where I can address technical demand in a much more intense environment. So basically, in short, I'm progressing from short bounds and in-place jumps to extended bounds and depth jumps over time. And those different series that you mentioned earlier give me a fairly smooth transition as I use them and apply them throughout the course of the training year. I still take a look at single leg and double leg, trying to progress from double leg to single leg over time. At all times of the year, I'm doing some single leg, and at all times of the year, I'm doing some double leg. But I begin with more an emphasis on double leg and finish with less of an emphasis on double leg, even in sports where double leg activity is pretty prevalent, because I think that the activation patterns in single leg plyometrics are entirely different, and there's more motor educability that takes place there. Also, when I look at plyometric volumes, the scheduling of volumes, I feel very strongly that in training cycles, mesocycles, 3, 4, 5 week training blocks, that you should front load your plyometric work. Typically, athletes early in the training cycles are fresher, they're more elastic, they're bouncier, and if we understand the basic premises of training readiness, we want to train elasticity when athletes are elastic. So typically, if you look at, for example, a 4-week training cycle that I put together for an athlete or a sport, you'll normally see higher volumes of plyometric work early in the cycle than you would see later in the cycle, which is something that surprises some people because typically you think of it being just the opposite. But again, as the cycle goes on, the athletes become a little more fatigued, a little less elastic, and the ground just isn't as fertile to throw plyometric seeds at that point. There are some things, of course, that elsewhere in the training program that I advance as the cycle goes on, but plyometrics, I try to take the opposite approach.
Great. Coach, I want you to finish up just with maybe some thoughts on maybe the mistakes that some trainers are making, or some of the things, maybe some misconceptions that you see with the way people approach the plyometric program.
Well, we've already mentioned a few, but I think one big one to kind of reiterate is the idea of purposeful training. Don't think of plyometrics just as something that you do for strength development. Think of it as a tool. Subcategorize it. Be a little bit more sophisticated in your approach to the purpose of each particular session. What exactly are you trying to accomplish at any particular time of the year? And also, by differentiating different forms of plyometrics, particularly the short bounds and the depth jumps, I think that a lot of trainers miss a real big opportunity to improve running mechanics. For example, if you look at acceleration mechanics, there's huge horizontal forces being applied during acceleration, and appropriate uses of horizontal short bounds in the same session just enhances their ability to apply forces in those particular planes. The same thing with maximal velocity sprinting and vertical types of plyometrics. So that's an opportunity that I think a lot of us miss out on and don't really delve into it quite deep enough to understand how we can use plyometrics in a way that really enhances quality. And then the last thing that I think we mess up on sometimes is understanding that plyometrics don't operate in a vacuum. What you combine them with within the course of a session is extremely important for the reasons that I just mentioned, motor educability, but also, they're very taxing on the neuromuscular system. They're highly neural as far as the demands that they produce. So if we are concerned with protecting and training a nervous system, and the way a nervous system interacts with muscle tissue, then we have to be concerned with how we group things. So I really prefer to group plyometrics into the same sessions with speed work, Olympic lifts, and your major weight training exercises like your squats and your presses and such. I don't think that they fit it well at all into sessions that don't feature those other components because of the neural grouping qualities.
Very interesting, Coach. This has been really great. I mean, I think watching you coach at in Providence was really an education in itself because, like I said, there were some simple things going on there that really I felt like I learned just from a few minutes into, because when you see some people moving around and some of the fixes that you were making, that was really, really great to see. So I highly recommend if anybody has an opportunity to see Coach Schexnayder coach or speak, you got to do it. So Coach, thank you so much for taking time out of your day and talking to us about plyometrics.
It was absolutely my pleasure. Thank you very much for the opportunity, and I'll talk to you again soon.
Hello, this is Brett Jones. Thank you for joining me for the Functional Movement Systems segment of the Strength Coach podcast. This is part 2 of breathing. Going to talk about practical applications and how you can work on breathing patterns and resources that you may want to look at. One of my first breathing drills is crocodile breathing. I'm going to lay you on your stomach, nice and relaxed, forehead on your hands. Got to make sure you're comfortable. If you're dealing with somebody who cannot lie prone, then you're going to go to the 90-90 position, which we'll talk about here in just a minute. But for those people that can lie prone comfortably, you're going to get them flat, forehead on the hands, and they're going to nasal breathe. Nasal breathing is also another big key as far as especially at relaxing breath. So you're going to nasal breathe. What you're going to feel immediately is that if you get some diaphragmatic action and you inhale through the nose, low and slow. You got to pretend you're in Bull Durham and they're telling you to breathe through your eyelids. But you're breathing low and slow. Visualize breathing into your feet. You're going to feel your stomach expand and push into the floor. That's going to make your low back rise and fall. And you're going to have this nice little action going where the floor gives you all of this proprioceptive feedback. Now you want to be sure you're more on the chest and not on the edge of the ribs. If you're holding yourself up in extension on the edge of your ribs, you're not going to get the same effect out of this. So you're really, the joke I make is that you're flat as roadkill and that you're breathing through your nose, you get this diaphragmatic action. And we also want to be sure that breath is happening in a 360-degree range. It's not just sticking your belly out. It really is getting the breath to fill in this 360-degree area. So you're breathing into your back, you're breathing into your sides, and it's this perfect 360-degree breath that's happening. And something like a light TheraBand tied around the umbilical area can give you feedback on whether you're breathing into that 360-degree position, 360-degree breath. So from those people that can't lie prone, we go into the 90-90 position. Comes to us from PRI. I learned it back in the 80s when I had a back injury, and the orthopedic I was working with put me in this recovery position. Egoscue calls it a recovery position. PRI calls it 90-90. My orthopedic said this is good for your back. But 90-90, you've got the feet on the wall, shins are parallel to the ground, thighs perpendicular, body nice and comfortable, good little supine position, pillow underneath the head if needed. One hand high on the chest, one hand low on the belly button or slightly below, and the same nasal breathing. And you're going to sit there and you're going to breathe through your nose. You're going to try and have that diaphragmatic breath, that 360-degree breath. Once you're comfortable with not breathing into the upper chest, you've got the air moving to the lower hand below the umbilicus, the belly button. Take your hands and put them just above your hips. You'll hit a soft spot where you're just above the top of the pelvis, but you're not on the floating ribs. And when you breathe, you want to see that nice equal expansion into both sides. So crocodile breathing, 90-90 position, invaluable in my opinion to working on people's breathing. We obviously want to bring this breathing pattern into everything that we do, different postures, different positions. With something like a rib grab or T-spine rotation drill, I don't pull and push and do a bunch of mechanical stuff. I breathe, deep diaphragmatic breathing, and open up that rib cage by using the breath to open that rib cage. Pay attention when you find yourself in positions where you lose your breath, you can't breathe efficiently. Stop and wonder for a minute why in a stretch or in a mobility drill, dynamic warm-up, whatever it is, that you hit a position where you couldn't breathe. Your breathe became struggled because you hit some position. Spend some time in that position learning how to breathe. You're probably going to mine some gold out of that. There's obviously a difference between breathing for performance. If I'm swinging a kettlebell, I've got a sharp inhale into tight abdominals. Pavel refers to that, martial artists refer to that as breathing behind the shield. I've got this nice sharp nasal inhale into a tight abdomen, which gives me lots of intra-abdominal pressure. Stu McGill calls it bracing. It's a great way to enhance your performance in certain strength activities. Get some air knocked out at the top, sniff some air back into a tight abdomen at the bottom again. So there's a difference between some of the performance breathing that we would use. Depending on your goal or activity, I may recommend several different breathing patterns. And then at rest, we want to see this nice nasal, diaphragmatic, really 6 to 8 breaths per minute. If you're taking 2 to 3 seconds at an inhale, you've got a brief 1 or 2 second pause in between inhale and exhale. You've got a nice 3 or 4 second exhale, and then you've got a 2 or 3 second pause. You're almost 10 seconds per breath cycle. You would only do that 6 times in a minute, right? So 6 to 8, 8 to 10 breaths per minute is a nice range to shoot for where you're just nice, relaxed breathing with pauses. If there's no pauses in your breathing, you're just hyperventilating all the time. And that's not a great thing to do. Buteyko is a Russian method of working on breathing. Has a lot to do with tolerance to CO2 and breathing patterns. Chetal has a book that's in a second edition now, Multidisciplinary Approach to Breathing Pattern Disorders. That's a recommended, 2 recommended resources there. Like I said, there's a lot of people talking about breathing right now. If you haven't thought about breathing as far as movement, hopefully this has opened your eyes a little bit to start thinking that maybe breathing is something to take a look at. It has that mechanical, neurological, and chemical functioning within the body that breathing really is so multifactorial. And again, back to that mechanical perspective, your diaphragm is responsible for your breathing, your posture, and for stabilization and performance. It's a lot going on at the diaphragm. It's a really important thing to look at. So this has been Brett Jones for the Functional Movement Systems portion of the Strength Coach podcast. For more information, click on to functionalstrengthcoach.com. We have some articles and things regarding breathing and more information for you there. Thanks very much.
to the Strength Coach Podcast, Business of Fitness segment, brought to you by ResultsFitnessUniversity.com. This is Rachel Cosgrove, and I want to tackle a question that I get often when I'm talking to some of you when we're out speaking at seminars, and it's a lot of you are, maybe you've opened your gym, you've already got it open, you've been open for, 6 months, and you've already got trainers on board, you've hired, you've done great, but you actually aren't sure if you have the right team on board. Maybe you have, I just spoke to somebody, they said, I have 5 trainers on board, and, I'm just at this point, we've been open 6 months, and I'm just not sure if they're the right people. I'm not sure if they're really, who I should have on my team. How do you know? How do you know whether they're the right people? How do you know when you're hiring? How do you know, as you start to build that team? Well, my first red flag on this is, why do you have 5 trainers when you've only been open 6 months? I think a lot of times we launch into starting to build this team. Maybe we meet people who want to be on board with us and we think they're going to be great trainers, so we start bringing them on as part of our team. But what we don't realize is that having a big team, you're now, spreading out all the resources that you have among, a lot more people. We've always been big on keeping a smaller team. Smaller teams are much easier to manage. I think part of the reason why someone like this might find that 6 months into it, their team are not on board, or they're not sure they're on board, or they don't know if they're the right people, is because both sides of it, they're probably actually not sure, because they're probably not making enough money. They don't have enough hours. They don't have enough clients because you have too big of a team. So as you build your business, start with a smaller team. Only hire the minimum amount of people that you need to cover your bases and really make sure that everybody's making, enough money. Everybody has all, the resources that you have can spread out over the team that you have. We've found that over the years, about 1 trainer to every 60 clients is about a good ratio to keep. So initially, as you're building your business and you're one coach and you build your clientele up to that 50 to 60 mark, that's about when you're going to feel like, okay, things are getting a little crazy. I'm having a hard time managing this on my own. And you're going to want to bring on your first employee, which if you've listened to my past podcast, you heard that first employee is going to be your office manager. From there, as you build up to that 100 client mark, that's where you're going to have that second trainer come in. And then pretty soon you can hire another trainer and you can step out of training so much so that you have 2 trainers working for you, training 100 clients. So if you have, more than 2 trainers working for you and you have less than 100 clients, you have too many people on board. You want your trainers to come on board. I mean, this is our vision for Results Fitness. This is what we really set out to do, is to create a place where people could have a career. They could really, set up, they could support their families. They could have, benefits. And so when we have a smaller team, we're able to give them more. We're able to help them to, make a higher income. We're able to spend more time with them to really get them up to speed and get them, to be the best trainers they can be. They're really on board with us because they're not going to be going and, looking to work someplace else to try to supplement their income. They're not going to be, going outside of our gym. They're fully on board. They realize that we are, we're totally dedicated to them and they're totally dedicated to us. And so keeping that team smaller is what's going to really set you up to be able to then, slowly grow your team over time, but only hire when you absolutely need them and as you're growing in your company. Having those full-time coaches who are 100% on board, who only work for you, really allows you to invest your time, invest your money. When you send them to seminars and you have them, doing continuing education, they're only going to be using it at your gym and that you're not going to be, investing in them and then they're going to be going elsewhere. And so, right now, if you are building your business and if you have more than, like I said, if you have, under 100 clients and you have more than 2 trainers working for you, reevaluate that, look over, how you can, maybe scale back some of those trainers and really build up a couple of them who are really your stars and really start to build a smaller team, tighter knit team who's going to be, more successful and really be 100% on board and ready to help your clients for the long term. Hope that helps you out as you guys are building your business. We'd love to see you all out at our next event, Results Fitness Launchpad. Check out resultsfitnesslaunchpad.com and we'll see you guys on the next Strength Coach podcast.
Hi, everyone. This is the Art of Coaching segment with Exos, formerly Athletes Performance. My name is Danielle Lafata, and I'm the Performance Nutrition Director for our Pro Elite Vertical. And we're on our second part series on nutrition as it relates to a national soccer team. As I mentioned in part one, I had the honor and privilege of working with the U.S. men's national team for 3 years, providing nutrition and culinary solutions during their monthly camps, as well as the 2013 Gold Cup and 2014 World Cup. To start our second part series, we're going to discuss the challenges surrounding a national soccer team, as well as what it takes to put together the menus for their camps at their hotels and airlines. And as it relates to the nutrition programming and goals that we set at the beginning of camp. So fueling the soccer athlete is no different than fueling other athletes. Generating the correct breakdown of fuel stuff is dependent upon overall weekly physical exertion, position, and goals. However, the challenges with a national team lie in the fact that it's a national team, and you only come together a couple times a year for a 10-day camp. And then, of course, depending on the year, if there's a major competition, about 30 days. Then there's the other challenge that whenever we're together, it's always a competition. So there's very little downtime. There's no preseason. There's no off-season for the most part. And then they live all over the world for the third challenge. So keeping track of them and continuing to support them and their goals outside of camp can prove to be truly tricky. Each camp means being in at least 2 different cities, states, or countries even. In a 10-day camp, we'll stay at 2 to 3 different locations. And in a month-long camp or competition, it could be up to 6 to 7 different hotels. This all needs to be taken into account when planning the menus and deciding if we want to give the kitchen recipes, for instance, because if we're not in the back of the house overseeing the food preparation, the recipes can be left up to interpretation, and 9 out of 10 times will not come out correctly. So this does not make for a happy team. So coordinating with the hotel's food service managers and head chef ahead of time is extremely important. And so is being able to adapt, develop a quality working relationship, and understand the knowledge base of the culinary teams that we're about to spend a couple days with to roll out these great meals. So this is where the nutritional principles of fuel, build, prevent, and protect, and having a strong food philosophy come in handy. Not to mention focusing on the 80-20 principle. You know, having a 20% team meals really helps to boost morale and keep compliance or, preventing the late night room service orders. So, eating breakfast, lunch, and dinner together during all camps is very common. Monday for those 10 days or for those 30 days with very few meals being on our own. Therefore, coordinating with the hotels is a great way to ensure a good menu rotation for variety, so minimizing repeats as well as making sure the menus or recipes requested can be easily created by that hotel staff. So coordination with the hotels also helps coordinating with the charter airlines, again, to make sure that there aren't any repeats and the food as well as the snacks on the plane are of the 80% variety, which was a rule of thumb for us on our charter flights. So these meal times are also a chance for nutrition education to happen and to reinforce nutrition plans, or as we like to call them at Exos, meal builders. These are created based off their energy demands and goals. Since the team meals are buffet style, it's up to the player to be the builder, so to speak. They have their architectural plan or their meal builder that lay out what they need for each meal and snack. Therefore, it's up to them to construct their plate based off their architectural plan. Using this time for nutrition and education behavior change can be extremely impactful. For instance, if they started feeling better, then we could discuss the whys and hows, relating their new eating behavior and drinking behavior patterns back to their energy and soreness levels, while the same is true as if they were starting to feel worse. So my goal is that they take something that they're learning during these camps back to their club team or back home with them. So then that brings me to our 5 mantras: eat clean, eat often, recover, hydrate, and mindset, that are actually derived from our 10 nutritional coaching keys to keep them simple. So in going through the initial education, we use these 10 nutrition coaching keys to also help facilitate the goal setting and behavior change. So as we go through the 10 nutrition coaching keys, I ask them to grade whether this particular key would be an easy or a hard behavior for them to change using a scale of 1 to 5. 1 being there is no way, I couldn't do this, I don't want to do it, and 5 being this could be very easy and simple. So then the nutrition keys that have been graded by them at a 4 or 5 will be our focus during that camp. So for instance, nutrition coaching key is to hydrate, and maybe it's as simple as adding an extra bottle of water to each of their main meals, and they can do that. So then that's what we will focus on during that time. Or maybe breakfast isn't a big meal for them because they don't like to wake up and cook breakfast. They just go to the training session. So then what we do, we know that breakfast is going to be open and readily available for them every single morning, and it makes it easy for them. So we try to create that behavior during that time at camp. And then this will also help when I'm reaching out to them in between camps, which again proves to be another challenge with schedules, time zones, and not to mention we may not see a player in the subsequent camps due to a multitude of reasons. And so then when they come back, and if they come back, we're almost starting from scratch. So, in conclusion, team meals and organization in this setting are important for many reasons. The athletes and staff are away from their home and their families anywhere from 10 to 30 days. There needs to be a good balance of food that is the comfort food. It tastes good, but at the same time providing all the necessary nutrients that they need to recover. Food is comfort. It's important to the brain as much as it is to the body. Keeping up spirits and well-being through food can be very impactful for a team. Looking at when developing the meal plans and even developing goals, looking at their culture, their palate maturity, what the special diets are. It's a huge process of the menu planning. I have 50 people from around the world to fuel and provide a balanced meal each time. It can prove to be very challenging to accommodate everyone's needs, dislikes, likes, allergies, and intolerance, and at the same time stay within the guideline to help facilitate recovery and the encouragement of fueling or eating enough to supply the demands of their training. And then you have the education piece. So these are the prime times to help continue to educate the athlete, as I discussed earlier, on why eating a certain way, a certain amount, certain foods over others can help maintain a well-oiled and tuned machine with little to no breakdowns. And along with creating behavior changes, this is also a time to get the player to try new foods. Having them try something that they don't readily have available to them in their country, or it has never been prepared in that way. So they don't think that they like it, but they try it and they actually realize that they like it. And yes, there are times they try it and they still don't like it, but that's okay because you have that chance that there might be something there for them. And I've gotten many players to try foods by being available and talking to the importance of that food and the specific preparation and how it will benefit them. So that's the menu planning as it relates to teams as well as nutrition, programming, and goal setting. I look forward to coming back for the next segment to discuss more soccer-specific strategies as they relate to recovery and supplementation. For more information about Exos education, please visit us at www.teamexos.com/education.
All right, that's going to do it for episode 169 of the Strength Coach Podcast. Special thanks to Chris Parr, Aaron Mcguirk, and the folks over at Perform Better. You can check them out at performbetter.com for all their products and info on their educational seminars. Don't forget the huge summer sale. Thanks to Coach Boyle and Schexnayder for sharing their insights and philosophies into the world of strength and conditioning and performance enhancement. Rachel Cosgrove for the Results Fitness University Business of Fitness segment. Check them out at resultsfitnessuniversity.com. Brett Jones and Functional Movement Systems. Check them out at functionalmovement.com. Danielle LaFata for her insights into the art of coaching with Exos. Check them out at teamexos.com/education. Don't forget, audible.com is giving Strength Coach Podcast listeners a special offer. To download your free audiobook today, go to freebookfromant.com. Again, that's freebookfromant.com for your free audiobook. And remember, you can join strengthcoach.com and have access to the site for just $1. 3 days, just $1. Once your trial is over and you become a member, you'll be able to download Coach Boyle's 2 books. To access that offer, go to strengthcoach.com, click the Join Now button to get started on your trial. My name is Anthony Renner. You can reach me at strengthcoachpodcast@gmail.com. Thanks again, and I'll speak to you next time.